Imagine a laptop, right? It's sitting in a hotel room in Tokyo.
Yeah, totally disconnected from the corporate VPN.
Exactly. The user is sound asleep, but in the middle of the night, the machine detects a critical system compromise.
Right.
And without any human intervention at all, it just completely uninstalls its own infected operating system. It isolates the malicious files,
Yeah.
and then it just rebuilds a pristine, fully configured Windows environment from scratch.
Which sounds completely crazy.
Right, because by morning, the user logs in, their desktop looks exactly the way they left it. They are completely unaware that a major security incident was neutralized while they slept. And today, we're looking at how that specific scenario is, well, it's no longer science fiction.
It really can't be science fiction anymore because the reality of managing enterprise hardware has fundamentally shifted.
Mm.
I mean, we are well past the point where organizations can rely solely on blocking threats at the door.
Yeah, the perimeter's basically gone.
It is gone. When you are responsible for tens of thousands of devices scattered across the globe, the speed at which you can recover a compromised endpoint is just as vital as the firewall that was, supposed to protect it in the first place.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we are going right into the deep end for you today,
Yeah.
especially if you're an IT decision maker or just someone fascinated by how massive, complex systems either hold together or fall apart under pressure.
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure.
Huge pressure. So our mission for this deep dive is to connect the dots between a terrifying wave of recent Windows zero-day vulnerabilities, a massive education sector data breach that just hit the news, and the absolute practical nightmare of managing large IT fleets.
Right.
And finally, we are going to explore that radical automated lifeline we just mentioned, zero-touch OS rebuilds, and endpoint recovery.
Because understanding the architecture of these new threats is crucial, obviously, but it's really only half the battle. If you manage an expansive fleet of laptops and desktops, a vulnerability report is basically just a piece of paper until you figure out the logistics of how you are going to practically keep your fleet alive when things inevitably go wrong.
Right. To understand why automated recovery is becoming so critical, we need to look at what IT teams are actually up against on a daily basis. Let's look at the Microsoft Patch Tuesday from April 2026.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that was a rough one.
The term record-breaking gets thrown around constantly in cybersecurity, but this specific update, it dumped 167 vulnerabilities onto the laps of IT administrators. We are talking about 11 critical flaws and 2 actively exploited 0 days.
It was a brutal patching cycle. And what made this particular month so alarming wasn't just the sheer volume of patches you had to test and deploy. It was the specific components of the operating system being targeted.
Like the remote code execution flaw in Windows Remote Desktop Protocol, right? Exactly, RDP. And a severe privilege escalation bug sitting right in the core Windows kernel.
Both of those were publicly disclosed too, meaning the technical blueprints were just out in the wild for anyone to weaponize. But I really want to zoom in on the Microsoft Defender vulnerabilities today, specifically CVE 2026-33825.
Right, Bluehammer.
Yeah, Bluehammer. This one carries a CVSS score of 7.8. For anyone not living in vulnerability databases every day, CVSS is the common vulnerability scoring system, and a 7.8 is considered high. Usually you see the 9s and 10s reserved for remote exploits, but a high-scoring local exploit like this one is basically the skeleton key attackers use to move laterally once they get inside.
Bluehammer is a masterful, albeit really terrifying, case study in how sophisticated local privilege escalation has become. It allows an unprivileged user, someone who just has a basic lockdown account on a machine, to gain full system-level access on fully patched Windows 10 and 11 systems.
The mechanism it uses to accomplish this is devious. It relies on something called a 2CTU race condition. That stands for time of check to time of use. Yeah, 2COU vulnerabilities are a nightmare to catch.
They really are. To picture how this works, imagine you are showing a bouncer your ID at a nightclub. The bouncer checks your ID, verifies you're of age, and the exact nanosecond he looks down to stamp your hand, you physically swap places with a wanted criminal.
Right.
By the time the stamp hits the hand, it is the wrong person, but the bouncer has already authorized the entry based on that initial visual check.
What's fascinating here is the cruel irony of the attack vector itself. Attackers are actively weaponizing the very tools built to protect the system. Defender is the built-in anti-malware solution for over 1 billion devices.
Yeah.
To do its job, to dig into the registry and quarantine a deeply embedded malware, it requires sweeping system-level privileges, and Bluehammer hijacks that exact cleanup process.
Right, so the exploit first drops a file that intentionally triggers a Defender detection. Defender acts like the bouncer, It sees the bad file and initiates the removal process. But the exploit uses a file system mechanism called a batch opportunistic lock or an op lock.
Yeah, all blocks are tricky.
Very. This op lock literally pauses Defender's file operation mid-scan. It freezes the antivirus software in its tracks. While Defender is stuck looking down at its metaphorical stamp, the attacker modifies the file system underneath it.
They do this by creating an NTFS junction point.
Okay, break that down for us.
Sure, so to understand an NTFS junction point, think of it as a deeply integrated system-level redirect. It is not just a standard desktop shortcut. It tells the operating system, hey, when a program tries to interact with folder A, invariably reroute that action to folder B.
Wow.
Yeah, so the attacker points Defender's target path away from the temporary directory it was cleaning and aims it straight into C Windows System 32, which is, of course, the absolute core of the operating system.
So when the op lock is released, Defender unfreezes and resumes its cleanup operation. It follows that redirected junction point, completely unaware that the target has changed. It thinks it is still operating on the malware, but instead it uses its massive system privileges to overwrite a legitimate system executable with the attacker's malicious payload. And once the system executes that overwritten binary, the attacker completely owns the machine.
And it did not stop with Bluehammer either. There was another exploit circulating in the same window called Red Sun.
Oh, right, Red Sun.
Yeah, Red Sun takes a similar philosophical approach, but abuses a completely different Defender feature, which is the cloud file rollback mechanism.
How does that one work in practice? I mean, cloud rollback sounds pretty safe.
You'd think so. When Defender detects a malicious cloud-tagged file, it automatically attempts to restore it to its original location. Red Sun basically triggers a detection, replaces the file with a cloud placeholder using the Windows Cloud Files API, and then uses those exact same op locks and NTFS junctions to redirect the rollback into C Windows System 32.
Oh, geez.
Right, so it achieves system-level code execution without the user ever clicking an executable or running a script.
It's like you spend weeks patching one hole, and the attackers just pivot to another feature of the exact same security software.
Exactly. And we also have to factor in the underlying hardware security layer. That same April update highlighted a ticking time bomb regarding Secure Boot Legacy 2011 certificates.
Right, the 2011 certs.
Yeah, these certificates are scheduled to officially expire on June 26, 2026. Devices relying on those old certificates will completely lose the ability to receive security updates for the Windows Boot Manager after that date.
That sounds like a massive administrative headache for IT departments.
Yeah, it is a massive vulnerability gap, honestly. If an organization doesn't proactively coordinate firmware and BIOS updates across their entire fleet to replace those certificates.
Which is hard to do.
Insanely hard. Their systems become entirely exposed to pre-OS bootkits, like Black Lotus.
Just to clarify for everyone, a bootkit infects the system before the operating system even loads. It subverts the entire boot process. If a bootkit is installed, your traditional endpoint security, your antivirus, your EDR endpoint detection and response software might be completely blind to it.
Yeah, the malware is running beneath them. It has already compromised the foundation the security tools stand on.
That is terrifying.
Let's pull back from the theoretical mechanics of these vulnerabilities, though, and look at what attackers actually do with these kinds of exploits in the real world. Because we just saw this play out on a massive scale with the Instructure breach, specifically targeting the Canvas learning management system.
Yes, the scale of the Canvas breach is staggering. Shiny Hunters, which is a known ransomware group, they claimed responsibility for stealing approximately 275 million records. We're talking about students, teachers, and staff across 8,809 school districts, universities, and online education platforms.
And in an educational context, it's not just credit card numbers you can easily cancel.
No.
You are looking at educational histories, internal system structures, student IDs, highly sensitive identifiers. Attackers use this stolen data to map out the target organization and launch highly convincing targeted phishing campaigns.
Right. They use all that inside info.
Exactly. They will email an employee or a student pretending to be the school's IT support, referencing actual courses and professors to gain absolute trust.
But wait, let me stop you there. As an IT admin listening to this, I'm looking at my centralized management console. If Microsoft issues a patch for that RDP vulnerability or the kernel flaw, can't I just push the update globally to all my endpoints and be done with it? Why does a local exploit like Bluehammer matter so much if I'm actively patching my fleet?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, We really have to look at the daily agonizing reality for IT decision makers managing large fleets. Patching is not magic.
Fair enough.
In a perfect vacuum, yes, you push the button and the machines are secure. But what happens when you have a fleet of 10,000, 50,000, or 100,000 devices?
Right, users are constantly hitting "Remind me tomorrow" on their update prompts. You have remote workers sitting on incredibly slow hotel Wi-Fi or metered mobile connections. You have devices that have been stuffed in a desk drawer and offline for 3 weeks.
You also have patches that conflict with proprietary legacy applications. Some patches outright fail to install, or worse, they corrupt the operating system and brick the machine entirely.
Oh, that's the worst.
It is. You never achieve 100% patch compliance instantaneously. If you have a 95% patch success rate in a 100,000 device fleet, you still have 5,000 vulnerable machines sitting right there on your network. There's always a vulnerability gap.
And that gap is exactly where the attackers live. Let's trace the full attack path. An employee gets tricked by one of those highly convincing phishing emails we mentioned from the Canvas breach. The email contains a malicious .rdp file. Because of an unpatched RDP vulnerability on their specific machine, just interacting with that file gives the attacker a foothold. Then the attacker deploys Bluehammer. They use the local privilege escalation we discussed to go from a standard, limited user to full system level.
And once they have system access, they essentially turn off the security cameras, they blind the EDR software, they disable system logging.
Then go dark.
Completely dark. At that point, when they deploy ransomware or a bootkit like Black Lotus compromises the OS layer, the IT department is completely stranded. You can't just remote in and run a quick antivirus scan. The operating system itself cannot be trusted. You have to entirely rebuild the machine from the ground up.
Just think about the sheer logistics of that. If the employee is sitting in a home office 3 states away from the IT help desk, you are looking at overnighting a loaner laptop, shipping the infected one back, physically wiping the drive, manually reinstalling Windows, reinstalling the VPN, the core applications, and trying to recover whatever files weren't encrypted.
It's a nightmare.
You are talking days of lost productivity for a single user.
Now scale that up during a massive ransomware event where hundreds of endpoints are compromised simultaneously. Your business operations grind to an absolute halt. The human capital required to manually re-image thousands of machines is paralyzing.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because this exact nightmare scenario is why the concept of zero-touch OS rebuild and endpoint recovery is completely changing the game. The sources we're looking at today highlight a platform called Swimage, which was built specifically to automate this massive logistical problem.
Yeah, the industry is shifting its focus. Instead of solely trying to build higher walls to keep attackers out, solutions like this address the reality that devices will eventually get compromised or critical updates will inevitably fail.
Right.
The new focus is on resilience, how incredibly fast you can bounce back.
Let's break down the mechanics of how this automated recovery actually works, because the capabilities are pretty ambitious. The platform states it can rebuild a crashed or infected PC, completely reinstalling the operating system, the applications, the drivers, and the user settings in under 15 to 30 minutes.
Which is incredibly fast.
It is, and most importantly, it can do it entirely offline.
And that offline capability is what separates this approach from traditional imaging tools or legacy deployment servers. Those older methods absolutely depend on a stable, high-bandwidth network connection to pull a massive operating system image down from a central server.
Right.
If the network is down or the device is remote, you are out of luck.
So this utilizes what is known as a local recovery cache and an offline deployment method. To visualize this, I think of it like having a highly trained mechanic locked in the trunk of every employee's car.
I love that analogy.
Right. Even if the car breaks down in a dead zone with no cellular service, no network connection at all, the mechanic can completely rebuild the engine on the side of a road without needing a tow truck to the IT help desk. This software securely stages the recovery bits, the clean OS image, and the necessary drivers on a hidden, encrypted partition of the local drive well in advance.
So when an event occurs, whether it's triggered by an automated policy because the EDR detected anomalous behavior, an IT admin pushing a button remotely, or even a user initiating it, the system has everything it needs to execute a bare metal rebuild immediately, completely isolated from any network dependency.
But wait.
But
this raises an important question for me, and I'm sure for anyone listening. If you are triggering a massive automated wipe and reinstall of the operating system, what happens to the user's data? Because an IT admin's second biggest fear, right behind a ransomware outbreak, is an executive discovering all their local files were vaporized during a security wipe.
Oh yeah, that is the critical barrier to automated reimaging. How do you format a drive without destroying the data on it, especially if the drive is already encrypted?
Exactly.
The software handles this through a specialized encryption handler and a data protect snapshot and rollback mechanism. During the rebuild process, it securely snapshots the user's data, their profiles, and their personalized settings.
But without moving everything.
Right. It does this by manipulating file pointers rather than physically moving terabytes of data, which is why the process is so fast.
So the data never actually leaves the device.
No, and that is vital for both security and speed. The system isolates the user data locally, it wipes the corrupted or infected OS partition, which obviously eliminates the malware or ransomware at the root level, lays down the pristine OS from the local cache, reinstalls the applications based on dynamic templates, and then seamlessly merges the user data back into the new environment.
That's amazing.
The employee logs back in 20 minutes later, and their desktop, their bookmarks, their files, they look exactly how they left them. Zero data loss, and practically zero productivity loss.
And to make sure the user doesn't accidentally interfere while the system is rebuilding itself, there's a feature called Splash Lock. It freezes the screen and keeps the PC completely locked down and secure throughout the entire migration process.
That's smart.
Yeah, it automatically validates tasks and organizes all the hardware drivers without any human intervention. It is a completely hands-off, self-driving process.
If we tie this directly back to the IT decision maker listening right now, this fundamentally shifts the economics and the risk profile of fleet management. And it starts at just around $4 a seat.
Wow, that's really accessible.
It is. It allows organizations to enforce a true zero-trust architecture. If an endpoint cannot mathematically prove it is perfectly compliant and secure, it does not connect to the network. It can slash downtime by over 80%.
It changes the math on incident response entirely, too.
Dramatically. The most critical metric in any breach is dwell time. How long the attacker is sitting inside your environment before you evict them.
Right.
Traditionally, if an endpoint acts suspiciously, security operations centers suffer from alert fatigue. They spend days pulling logs, investigating, trying to figure out if it's false positive or a real threat. They hesitate because the cost and disruption of manually wiping the machine is so extraordinarily high.
You don't want to nuke a laptop unless you're absolutely certain it's infected.
Exactly. But with automated zero-touch recovery, the operational cost of wiping a machine drops to almost nothing. If an endpoint throws a strange alert or you suspect a phishing link was clicked, you don't waste 72 hours investigating. You just trigger a zero-touch rebuild.
Just wipe it.
Just wipe it. The potential threat is vaporized, and you have a pristine, fully compliant machine back on the network 15 minutes later. You literally starve the attacker of the dwell time they need to map your network and move laterally.
So, what does this all mean? If we step back and look at the whole picture we've painted today, we are operating in a landscape filled with 167 Vulnerability Patch Tuesdays. We have unpatchable bootkits threatening our hardware layer, and relentless ransomware gangs stealing hundreds of millions of records to fuel sophisticated phishing campaigns. The assumption that you can perfectly block every attack and patch every vulnerability before it is exploited is, honestly, genuinely dangerous.
True security isn't about having an impenetrable perimeter anymore. It is about resilience. It is about your organizational capacity to take a hit, absorb the damage, and automatically, instantly bounce back to a known good state without human intervention.
Which leaves us with a final thought I want you, the listener, to really mull over. We have gone from an era where fixing a computer meant a technician sitting at a desk with a stack of CDs to a reality where software can securely cache recovery bits locally, maintain federal-grade encryption, and perfectly rebuild a broken or infected operating system entirely offline in just 15 minutes.
It's a huge leap.
It really is. And if endpoints can literally heal themselves anywhere in the world, completely detached from the corporate network, are we approaching a future where the traditional human IT help desk becomes entirely obsolete?
Oh, wow.
If the devices can instantly revive themselves, maybe Tier 1 tech support is about to become a relic of the past.
That is a fascinating implication for the future of IT infrastructure. I mean, it changes everything.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the systems you rely on, keep exploring the solutions, and we will see you next time.